If RPMs raise your BPMs, if the open road is an open invitation, then get up and go. Go turn some heads. Go turn a wrench. Go windows down. Go volume up. Go in. Go out. Go off. Napa has America's largest network of parts and care, here to keep you firing on all cylinders.
I know I'm standing between you and maybe cocktails, so I'm going to try not to waste your time. I'll just start right off a little bit about my presentation. Back in another life, I was an accountant and I used to do repair shops and parts stores only. And when you're an accountant, you get to see a lot of things that maybe other people don't. And what I would do is, when I was doing shops, I'd see shop A and shop B, they were a mile apart. Shop A is making a ton of money and doing really, really well, and shop B would be struggling and barely getting by, and they're only a mile apart, sharing the same weather conditions, sometimes even the same customers. So the question is, what is it that the high-profit firms do differently than the average shop, and more importantly, how do they do that? So I'm going to carve out a couple of things today in my presentation of what they do differently, and we'll go from there. I'm trying to get, okay. And my topic today is auto service profitability, and we're going to go from there. The average shop, and I will show that with average shop numbers. The average shop leaves $50,000 to $80,000 a year on the shelf every year by doing jobs that they don't have a choice to do that produce below average gross profit. An example would be a tire rotation, an intake manifold gasket, installing a rear main seal, 5 hours to install a seal, and the seal is $45 or $50. You're busy, you have the expenses there, but the profit is not there, the gross profit per billed hour. And it happens because you have to do the work. If you don't do the oil changes, we know you're not going to get the brakes or the tires, that sort of thing. So we'll just start off with that and open up the curtain. Let's talk quickly about the market. And as a master of the obvious, technology has changed everything. Let's just talk about parts on this side of it. Parts sold per mile has, for a long time, been declining. They last longer, and vehicles don't require as many parts today as they did. Let's take a look at internal combustion engines versus EVs. The average internal combustion engine has about 28,000 to 30,000 parts if you count every nut, bolt, rivet, stud, maybe 100 parts in an alternator alone, versus the average, say, Tesla, has 7,000 to 10,000 parts. In terms of moving parts, from what I can gather, the average internal combustion engine has about 18,000 to 20,000 moving parts that would wear. The average electrical vehicle has only about 2,000 to 2,500 moving parts. So what's going to happen, we're going to continue to sell less parts per driven mile, but where are your expenses going to go? They're going to go up. Well, there's good news about that, and I'm going to get you in a second. Just in terms of population, in 2020, about 1.8% of the vehicles registered in operation were electric vehicles, and they were mostly in California. It is projected, and who knows if that's going to happen, that about 14% of the vehicles registered in operation will be around in 2030. That, again, means we're going to sell less parts. Well, the good news is carpenters, electricians, and plumbers figured that out a long time ago, haven't they? If you go to an electrician, they don't care whether you get the electrical outlets or they get them, or the lights or whatever. In fact, they prefer you get what you like. If you call a plumber, they don't care whether you get if you want to put in a faucet, they don't care if you get it at Home Depot and put it, or they get it. They make all their money in labor, and any parts profit would be extra money, and I'm going to show, that's one of the things we show shops that they can do. That's where we're headed. Let's quickly talk about the vehicles. Back when I came in this business, you were mechanics. Then you went to technicians. Now I call you techtricians. Why? Because the vehicles are so much electric. About 55% of a shop's business today is some form of electronics. Now, some of it is easier and more profitable. Some maybe not so much. But it has had an effect because typically you put you have a higher direct cost in making that repair. You may or may not be selling parts, that sort of thing. I'll give you an example of that. I bring my vehicle to your shop and I say, could you do me, for a brake job, and I say, while you have it, could you do me a favor? I have these 2 power side mirrors and the passenger mirror intermittently sticks. Now I get out and I tap it and it works and it doesn't, it doesn't, it doesn't. Could you help me out on this? So you say, sure. You put a tech on that vehicle for 2 actual hours and fixed it, and all it was moisture or a poor connection. Now I'm going to use $100 an hour during this session because it's easy math to work with. If you charge the customer 2 times 100 is $200, and you paid your tech $30 an hour, the computer says you took in 200, you paid 2 times 30 is 60 going out, and you made $140 profit. It takes $140 in profit, divides by the sale of 200, says you made 70% gross profit. You are looking good. But it's actually a bloodbath, isn't it, when you think about it? Because you had 2 hours on that mirror, which was the financial equivalent of doing a 2-hour repair, and the customer brought their own parts. And the vehicles are getting engineered that way more so. I'm going to say this, a computer cannot tell you whether you're profitable or not. It doesn't know how much you were supposed to make or when you were supposed to make it. An example of that would be the first 7 jobs of drivability. A can do the work, B can do the work. I'm tech C, you put me in that job, it's a comeback at best. Instead of having the luxury of spreading 7 repairs over 3 people, you could spread it only over 2. What's going to happen is the computer adds up all 7 ROs and the profit's exactly the same, isn't it? But it didn't know that I stood around all day or that customers may have had to wait longer for their vehicle. Another example, you put a water pump on at 10 in the morning as opposed to 9. The cost and the profit was the same at 10 as it was at 9, and so wasn't the labor charge. Okay, but what happened was between 9 and 10, we had expenses running and no revenue. So it isn't always are the tickets profitable. I've seen people pre-program a computer so it will not even print a ticket unless it makes a predetermined profit that you want to make. All that will do is guarantee there wasn't an override. It doesn't mean you're profitable. Okay, one story I'm going to use today, which would be the theme. It's a true story. A husband and wife had a Volvo, and she took it shopping. She parked it, came out a couple of hours later, it would not start. She called her husband. He came over 45 minutes later and started right it up for him. And he looked at her like, what's wrong with this? And they got to the point where they couldn't trust the vehicle. They'd brought it to a shop on a few occasions and thought it was fixed, but it wasn't. There was no condition they could create that would make it happen on demand, like hot, cold, wet, dry, pulling, nothing. They got to the point they couldn't trust the vehicle. So this shop owner, in frustration, sent the husband and wife to a shop that had a reputation pretty much far and wide for they could fix anything electrical. And I was spending 2 days at that shop learning. So when the husband and wife came, this man put his best technician in the vehicle for 3 actual hours and fixed it. And all it was a clip under the dashboard. Now, number 1, he didn't sell any parts. Number 2, the technician that worked on that vehicle was being paid $10 an hour more than anybody else in the shop because he was the resident guru. Number 3, you're paying for information, Ford, GM, Chrysler, Identifix. And number 4, having test equipment that had to be maybe updated. So if you charge 3 times 100 is 300 and paid your check 3 times 30 is 90, again, you have a $210 profit divided by the $300 sale. Once again, 70% gross profit on the ticket. You look great, but you're bleeding to death. You even lost more money doing the diagnostics than you did the labor-intensive work. One last story I'll tell about that. I'm told to put a headlight in a GMC, you take the front bumper off, get underneath and remove the reservoir, change the bulb, then put the reservoir back, then go back and put the bumper on. And even if you're getting paid for every single second that you worked in that vehicle, you really may be not making any money. You got 2 hours putting the bumper on and off. The financial equivalent is if somebody brought their own parts because you're not selling a proportionate amount of parts. So we're going to have to look at how do we recover that, because this is not your grandfather's Buick, as they say. That was high tech. Some of these cars even had power windows. And this might be a grandfather's Buick, but he probably isn't going to work on it. As a master of the obvious, you fix what your customers drive. And let's talk about how this market really kind of took off. Back when Dad was in business, we had one labor rate that solved it all. And work was broken into 3 categories: standard, labor-intensive, and diagnostic. Standard work is in the blue. It was about 81% of a shop's business. In those days, they ran pretty much 50% parts, 50% labor for years and years, and they made a lot of money. Alternators, starters, brakes, water pumps, parts, labor, parts, labor, parts, labor. About 11 to 14% of Dad's business was what we called labor-intensive for the time. Now, labor-intensive work is where you have the same skills, talent, and expenses, but the profit per billed hour is way less. Gross profit per billed hour is less. An example of that, again, 5 hours to install a rear main seal. Well, let's take a look at Dad's day, maybe swapping an engine. Even though there was room for convention under the hoods. Sometimes they didn't get their full profit. They certainly weren't going to get their full profit on an engine. Today, the labor intensive is even growing more and more as the vehicles become more compact, and you know this. So, like for an example, changing spark plugs on a transverse V6 engine. You got to pull the engine halfway out to get at the fireside wall to change those spark plugs. And again, if you're getting paid for every second at that time, at your regular labor rate, you could be bleeding to death because you're not selling enough parts to go along with it. The big switch has happened is, if you take a look at the explosion in the yellow, and I can't show you, I don't have a laser pointer that will show up on the screen, but the diagnostics in Dad's business went from about 5 to 55% of the business. Why is that so important? That's going to grow more and more as we go to electronic vehicles. And usually it requires a higher skilled technician to do that, which means higher wages, a higher direct cost. You're paying for information, equipment, test equipment. The standard work, where the money was in the blue, that shrunk from about 81 to about 30%, and the labor intensive is also growing. So the two areas of growth in terms of the repairs are labor intensive and diagnostic, right? And in both of those categories, with your standard labor rate, you're losing money. So what we're going to talk about is, today we need 3 labor rates, a standard, labor intensive, and diagnostic, and we're going to develop those labor rates with a formula so that any of that lost profit will be built into your labor rate and take you only up to average. We'll get you from below average to average profit. Let's start right off and take a look at a shop. We have 3 techs, Tech 1, Tech 2, and Tech 3. And for this exercise, I'm going to make believe they're all being paid $25 an hour. So we have an apples to apples comparison, okay? And so times 8 hours, they all make $200 a day. The only difference is technician number 1 is 80% efficient. Technician number 2 is 70% efficient, and technician number 3 is 55% efficient, which is a little bit below average. It's a family business. And the best thing about, let me just back up for a second here. Let's take their weight. If I took 8 hours times technician 1's efficiency rate, 8 times 0.80, he or she is billing 6.4 hours out of 8. If I took Tech 2, 8 times 0.70, Tech 2 is billing 5.6 hours out of 8. If I took Tech 3, 8 times 0.55, he or she is billing 4.4 hours out of 8. Now let's just say this is a family business, and I'm Tech C. It's a family business, and we all know the best thing about a family business, it's a family business. And the worst thing about a family business, it's a family business. I am Tech number 3, your brother-in-law. You can't stand the sight of me. But my wife and your wife are sisters, best friends, shop together, text each other, do everything together. They love each other. You can't stand the sight of me. You'd love to fire me, but if you do, you're never going to need air conditioning in your house because it's always going to be ice cold in there. So I'll just leave that there for a second, okay? Now, I went on vacation for a week, and I came back after a week, and I went up to you with the boss, and I said, could I talk to you in private? I have some great news I'd like to share with you, but I didn't really want to be public about it. So you say, sure, geez, I think my prayers have been answered. I'll bet this pinhead's going to tell me he found a job somewhere, and I'm going to try hard not to smile when he tells me, oh, no, I'm not going anywhere. I love it here. Why would I go anywhere? The news I wanted to share with you is my wife, we're going to have a baby again. And, you know, I've never been much about the money, but I was hoping you could give me a pay raise. You know, for the children. You care about children, don't you? And the babies. So as you go back and you go, oh, that knucklehead, and you go back into your shop and you do this calculation. You take technician number 1, $200, divided by 6.4 hours, that's his daily wages, and you find out technician 1 doesn't cost you $25 per billed hour. He or she costs you $31.25 per billed hour. Technician 2, $200 divided by 5.6. He doesn't cost you $25 per billed hour. He costs you $35.71 per billed hour because he doesn't get as much done as Tech 1. Tech 3, the brother-in-law, $200 divided by 4.4. I cost $45.45 per billed hour, and I'm the one who wants the pay raise. Okay? So now I'm going to just take a look at this and show the importance of efficiency in this sense. One of the things we look for in a shop is 67% gross profit on labor without raising your labor rate and without cutting wages. It's done through efficiency. And just like a part, if you want to make a certain profit on any part, you divide by the opposite of what you want to make. So if that was a $31.25 part and I wanted 40% on it, I would divide it by 60. If I wanted 50%, I would divide it by 50. If I wanted 60%, I would divide it by 40. In this case, I want 67%, so I divide it by 0.33. So if I took under Tech 1, 3125 divided by 0.33, you'd have to charge $94.70 for Technician 1 to get 67% profit. Tech 2, $35.71. I'd have to charge $108.21 for Technician number 2. Why? Because Tech 2 isn't getting as much done. Tech 3, $45.45 divided by 0.33, I'd have to charge $137.74 to make the same amount of money. Now, let me put it another way. Let's make believe these are 3 shops. Shop 1, Shop 2, Shop 3, all in the same market area. If Shop 1 was running at 80% efficiency, they could charge $94.70 and make the same money as Shop 2 at $108.21 and the same money as Shop 3 at $137.74. In fact, Shop 1 could raise his labor rate from $94.70 to $100 and make more money than Shop 2 and Shop 3 with the lowest labor rate in town. It isn't jacking your labor rate that makes the money. It's internal performance that makes the money. So I'm going to do a very silly, stupid marketing thing. And I'm going to just get off the stage here. You don't need to look at me. And I'm going to walk around and say, and I'll get back up there. I'm going to, you're the customer. Can I have your name? Adam. Adam. Okay, Adam's the customer. So I come into my shop on Monday. We looked the vehicle over. We gave him a quote, and Adam said, fine. You said this wasn't going to be a safety issue. I need the vehicle all week. I have a lot of errands, but I could drop it off Friday morning. But then I wouldn't be able to pick it up till 5 o'clock. Is that okay? We think, perfect. We have the vehicle all day without the customer, right? That's exactly what we want. So Adam comes in Friday and he say, Adam, I know you're an understanding man, right? I just want to tell you this. You know the other day when I gave you the quote, I was going to have technician number 1 work in your vehicle. The man is a crackerjack. He's the best tech we have. But the poor guy called in. He's sick as a dog. He's not going to be here. Hey, but don't worry about a thing. I'm not going to let you down. I have technician number 2, right? But I want to be honest with you. Technician number 2 isn't quite as good as technician number 1, so I have to charge you $13.51 more an hour. You say, wait a minute, what did you just say? You say the guy's not as good and I have to pay more? Of course you do. I got expenses to pay here. What do you think? This isn't a charity organization. I got stuff to do here. So as you're walking out the door, never to come back, never again, I say, hold on. I don't know what I was thinking. I can't have technician 2 work in your vehicle, Adam. He's all booked up. But I know you need your vehicle this weekend, and I'm not going to let you down. I have another plan. I have my brother-in-law. But I want to tell you something. My brother-in-law is not a smart man. And he's not fast either. And because he's so slow, I got to charge you $43.34 more an hour. Now, obviously, if any one of us ever marketed that way, you'd be out of business in 4 seconds flat, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? But the law of the business says, okay, if you're shop 3, you either raise your labor rate by $43.04 and hope the customers like it, and of course they won't, or cut your expenses or become more efficient. So let's say we decide, well, we'll cut the expenses. So we get that old brother-in-law again, and we find out he's not that bright, and we convince him to go on flat rate. So we decide we're going to pay him $1 an hour flat rate. And every time he bills out a whole hour, he gets paid a whole $1. And if he doesn't bill out anything, and I'm the brother-in-law, and if I don't bill anything, I don't earn any money. So which means you're a little cheap, and I'm a little dumb. But you like dumb guys. So this week I billed out 10 hours of labor, 10 times 100, $1,000 in labor. I took in $1,000 in parts. I took in $2,000 in revenue, and you get a payroll of $10. You get the most profitable looking work orders on the planet, the highest gross profit in history. It all looks beautiful, right? Except you're going to bleed it to death because the computer didn't know you were closed 30. You had an invisible sign up in your shop that said, I'm closed 30 hours out of 40 and just keep the other expenses running. And the money that was saved by the low payroll was far offset by the fact that I didn't take any revenue for 30 hours. Everybody in this room knows the cost of any employee is way less than the cost of running an entire shop. So the other thing that happens in real world is you need a labor rate that covers a Tech 1, Tech 2, Tech 3. Even if you're a one-person shop, you've had A days, B days, C days. I've had Z days. We've had all that stuff happen, right? And we need a shop labor rate that's going to cover all those different talents, not just what the guy charges down the street. So what I'm going to do is throw that away and talk about a labor rate that covers the different skill sets. And really what we do is we start off, we might have Tech 1, 2, or 3, or Tech A, B, and C, and we kind of think of yourself as a labor factory. And let's just say last year, over the last 12 months, you manufactured $320,000 in labor sales. That's labor only now. If I divided that by your labor rate, that means you billed 3,200 hours that year. Okay, and you may even have more than one labor rate, but it means you billed 3,200 hours at your standard labor rate. That picks up something like you quoted a 2-hour job, you got it down in 1 hour and 45 minutes, but the customer paid for 2 and everybody's happy. Or you quoted a 2-hour job and you got it done in 1 hour and 2 hours and 10 minutes and didn't bill for it. Or you had a comeback. It's just net billing. So what did it cost me? What was my direct cost to generate those labor sales? Well, it was my tech's wages. So my tech's wages are $140,000. So I took $140,000 in wages and divided by the number of hours I billed. That means my shop cost per billed hour is $43.75. Now I'm looking for 67% profit on that, just like when you buy a part before you sell it, you know you want to make a certain profit, or a tire, you want to make a certain profit. I want 67% profit on my labor, so I take the $43.75 divided by 0.33, and it tells me in order to make 67% profit at my shop's performance, I would have to charge $132.58, and I'm charging $100 now. So are you going to jack your labor rate by $32.58 and hope the customers like it? Probably not. Right? In other words, on the other side of that coin, if his required shop labor at $132.58 is higher than what he's charging, it's a red flag. It means there's something wrong in that business. There's an inefficiency, and your computer's not going to see it. Okay, but there's something going on. On the other hand, if you did that calculation and your labor rate comes at less, let's say you did the calculation and it came in at $90 an hour and you're charging $100. Well, heck, you're not going to lower your labor rate from $100 to $90. You're still going to get that extra $10 an hour, right? Times 3,200 hours, you're going to make an extra $32,000 because you're efficient. But you're not pricing yourself out of the market. You're just making money, the customer's not having to pay for that. It's a two-step process. I take the labor sales and I bring them down, and I realize you may not be able to see that. And I subtract the tech's wages. So I got labor sales of $320,000 minus my tech's wages, regardless of how I paid them, hourly, flat rate, straight commission, whatever. I paid $140,000 to generate $320,000 in revenue. I made a profit of $180,000. That might look good to an accountant or to you, $180,000 after I paid all my technicians. But if I took that labor profit and divided by my labor sales, I only made 55.7% gross profit, which is below average. We want 67%. So this shop actually has issues with it, and you're not seeing it on your income statement. Okay. What I'm going to talk about now is trying to improve the efficiency of the shop a little bit. Do you have an employee incentive program where employees improve your business? Kind of a little bit like what Gene was talking about a little earlier. Here's a real simple format. My labor rate's $100 an hour, and let's say last year I worked on vehicles, or we did, all our techs, worked on vehicles 612 hours. If we billed every hour that we worked on vehicles times 100, then our shop potential was $61,200, wasn't it? Let's say we actually billed $32,436 divided by the $61,200. That's 53%. The average shop is 56.8% efficient. I'm talking about the entire shop now. What that really means is the average shop, for every 100 hours that the shop is open, they're only billing 56.8 hours per 100 that they're open at their full labor rate. Doesn't mean they're not working. They're doing oil changes and test drives and tire rotations and so forth, rear main seals, intake manifold gaskets, swapping engines, transmissions, but they're not making their full normal gross profit. They're just busy. So the average is 56.8. This shop here is at 53%, so it's horrible. So I say, well, what if we could improve the efficiency of this shop by 5%? And we went from 53 to 58% of our potential. Well, if my potential is 61,200 times 58%, I would have billed 35,496. If you look on the left side, I actually billed 32,436. So if we improved our efficiency at $100 an hour by 5%, that's $3,060 with the 3 techs. A 5% increase in efficiency is at $100 an hour is $1,020 per month per tech. It's the equivalent of each technician billing 1 more hour every 2.5 days. It's 3 minutes an hour. It's the difference between turning a wrench and billing it at 8 a.m. or 8:03 a.m. If we think about that, a lot of us lose 3 minutes an hour, and it's there if we find it. So if I were going to set an incentive and say, well, if we had a 5% increase in efficiency, we went from 53 to 58%, which is not where I want to be, I'd still have another 3,060 in labor. I would not have an incentive on parts because the parts are required to make the vehicle run right. That's not, okay, but labor you can control. So $3,060 is $1,020 per tech. What if we had a 7.5% increase in efficiency? Then my efficiency would go from 53 to 60.5, which is below the average of the top 25 significantly. A 7.5% increase in efficiency would generate $4,590 in additional labor alone at $100 an hour. A 7.5% increase in efficiency is billing 4.5 minutes more an hour per tech. 4.5 minutes an hour. What if we had a 10% increase in efficiency? We went from 53 to 63%, which is still below the average of the top 25. If we did that, then our labor revenue would be 63% of that, of 61,200 potential. Our labor revenue would be 38,556 versus 32,436. That's $6,120 in additional labor we'd have generated that month because we found a way to get each one of our guys to get 6 minutes an hour. So it's the accumulation of small details done over and over and over is what changes things. I'm going to talk quickly about where to look for efficiency. I know you can't see those slides, so I'm going to get down where I can, and I'll just talk about it for a second here, okay? What I did is with some of the classes we had, we know that the average shop does anywhere from 65 to about 80 different things, from test drives to tire rotation, to mountain balance tires, to air conditioning, to whatever it might be. So we listed with those customers, I said, with a whole room full of shops, we just did a sample of this, and we do it, it's different in every area. What are the top 10 most repetitive things you do? So they said test drives. How many do you do a week? 30. How long does it take? 2/10 of an hour. So 30 a week times 2/10, we spend 6 man-hours a week doing test drives. There's 52 weeks in a year divided by 12 months means there's 4.3 weeks in a month. So 6 hours times 4.3 weeks, we spend 25.8 man-hours doing test drives, okay? We do 30 a week times 4.3 weeks, you do them 129 times a month. If you want to save a step or 3 minutes here and there, you find what you do most repetitively and focus on that. For an example, if you sold or installed a set of struts once every 2 months, and you could cut your strut installation time in half, you wouldn't save anything. You don't do enough struts to make it worthwhile. So you want to focus where you're most active. Another example of that, safety inspections, 20 a week times 15 minutes. So 20 a week times 0.25 is 5 hours. Times 4.3 weeks is 21.5 man-hours. You spend 5 hours a week doing them, 21.5 man-hours a month, and we do them, 20 of them times 4.3 weeks, you do them 86 times a month. Digital inspections, the same thing. 5 hours a week, 21.5 hours a month, 86 times a month. Oil changes, 20 a week times 6/10, 12 hours a week doing them, times 4.3 weeks, 51.6 hours a month. 20 times 4.3, 86 times a month. So you see where I'm coming from. If I get all the way down to the number 10 and look at the numbers below, total man-hours to do the top 10 most repetitive activities. It has nothing to do with profit now, it's time. Total man-hours to do the top 10 activities requires, divided by 40 hours, would require 2.3 full-time employees, just doing 10 out of 80 different things that you do. The average shop has 3.3 technicians. So 2.3 techs are doing your top 10 most repetitive activities, and you got 1 tech to do the other 70 activities. You might wonder why it gets confusing and chaotic sometimes in a shop. As far as the number that we do in a month, we added up all the steps. It's 599 steps to do the top 10 most repetitive activities. If you could save 1 step out of each one of those categories, it's 599 steps, isn't it? Times 12, it's over 7,180 steps a year. So it's the cumulative effect of small details done over and over and over is what makes the difference. You don't see this on a financial statement, and I've seen a lot of them. Okay, let's talk about the labor-intensive recovery rate, and we'll go from there. This is called a concept page, and it's a concept page simply because not every shop is at $100 an hour, not every shop is 50% parts, 50% labor, and not every shop makes exactly 40% profit on the parts. So we sold 100 in labor, we sold 100 in parts, we made 200 in revenue. If I sold 100 in parts, I made 40%, I made $40 on the parts. So added together, I made $140 in gross profit per build hour between the labor and the parts. Now, I haven't paid for anything, okay, anything at all, except for the parts. So I'm going to talk about if your normal profit is $140 an hour and you install dealership parts because you can't get them from a parts store, you're not going to make the same money, are you? I'll give an example of that. Every time you know, and I'll show you how to program that in your computer, every time you know you're going to make below average gross profit per build hour, you could sell the parts at cost and use the recovery rate and make the same money. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you bought $50,000 from a parts store. You normally made 40%, you'd have made $20,000. Well, let's say you had to buy the $50,000 from the parts store, but they didn't have them. You had to get them from the dealership. They were the only source, and you're only getting 20% from the dealership. So you got the same skills, talent, and expenses involved. You're going to make $20,000 from the store and $10,000 from the dealership. Here's what you could do. When you buy the parts from the dealership, you sell them to them at your cost, and you charge $140 an hour. Now what you've done is you built that profit right into your labor. It's called managing to the middle. If you took 1 and 10 and added it together, it's 11. Divided by 2, the average is 5.5. If 1 was poor and 10 was excellent, right? Then average, 5.5, which is a fictitious number, by definition, it's the very best of the worst, but it's also the very worst of the best. And in your shop, you do these jobs all the time. You do jobs that are below average. So every time you do a job where the profit is going to be on that 5.5 and below, you sell the parts at cost and charge, and it's built into your labor rate with a formula, and you take everything from below average up to average. Everything from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right up to 5.5. At 5.5 and above, you never touch it. So you're always competitive where you make all your money. You just stop losing money. It would seem like it's profit to you, but it wouldn't be profit. It would just be recovered loss. You cannot have average expenses with below average gross profit for a long period of time. So we're going to identify that. Every time you do have a job where you know you're going to make less than average gross profit, you can sell the parts at cost, charge, in my example, $140 an hour, and you're all set. Okay? But we actually need a formula to set it up, so I'll show you how to do that. Making below average jobs profitable. I'm going to use a silly kind of an example that's dramatic. Let's say for some reason, I'm not saying you would ever do that, but you agreed to install a used engine at your cost of $1,600. And you know it's going to take you 15 hours with little or no parts to be sold with it, okay? Now, if you try to get $1,600, 40%, say, on a $1,600 engine, we all know you'd never get that. If you took $1,600 divided by 0.60, you'd have to charge $2,667 for the engine, and then add 15 hours of labor to it, times 100, another $1,500. You'd have to charge the customer $41.67. You'd probably never get the job. So let's look at a typical mechanical repair. If you had 15 hours times 100, you'd have 1,500 in labor. If you had 1,500 in parts, at 40%, you made 600 in parts. So you'd have made somewhere around $2,100 in gross profit if you were doing a typical normal mechanical repair, but this is not a typical normal mechanical repair. It's an engine. And again, if you try to get your full profit on an engine, you probably wouldn't. So it's not what you say, but how you say it. What if I went like this? What some people will do is they charge $1,500 for the labor. 15 hours times 100 is $1,500 labor. And then they might add a couple of $100 to the engine, and it's close. Close isn't enough. We want it all. So here's what you could do. If you had that engine, $1,600, you sell the engine at cost and use your labor-intensive rate. Okay? 15 hours times 140 is $2,100 labor. The engine is $1,600. Total bill out the door, $3,700. Not $41.67, but $3,700. If the customer says, what's your labor rate, they'll be happy to tell you. How long did it take you to do that job? They'll be happy to tell that. But it's just a menu price. When I do an oil change or a tire rotation or an alignment, transmission flush, fuel injection cleaning, brake fluid flush, I tell you how much it is, not how long you had the vehicle in the rack. And this is just another menu price. And you could practice doing that, and you'd be okay. Well, let's talk about gross profit per build hour, and more people are doing this. I'm going to talk about gross profit per build hour. Our shop did $600,000 in sales, no tires in here now, it's mechanical, and 306 of it was labor. So if I took the $306,000 divided by my combined sales of $600,000, labor is 51% of my revenue. Well, if I took my labor rate of $100 in this example, and it's 51% of X, or divided by 0.51, it says my combined sales per billed hour between parts and labor is 196.08. Well, if I have 196.08 and I subtract my labor rate from it, then the rest has to be part sales per billed hour, which would be 96.08. So 96.08, let's say my normal provident parts in this example is 45%. 96.08 times 45%, it means I make $43.24 average gross profit per billed hour when I'm working on a vehicle. But when I did those mirrors I talked about, we didn't make $43.24. When we talked about installing dealership parts, we're not making $43.24 an hour. When installing that engine, we're not making $43.24 an hour. So there's a lot of times when you have the activity, skills, talent, expenses, and not the revenue to cover it. That's where we have a labor-intensive rate. So in this example, I'd have two labor rates, a standard labor rate of 100 when I'm selling parts, brakes, alternators, starters, and a labor-intensive rate, maybe when I'm doing dealership parts or parts where I make below average gross profit. Now, if you go on my website, vinwaterhouse.com, you can do this with your phones. I'm going to ask you to take a picture in a minute. Just remember my name with a .com. Here's a snapshot of it. There's a podcast that talk about, podcast 427 and 471 might talk about this. There's an article that'd be interesting about labor. But anyway, when you get to that screen, scroll down, and you're going to see that calculator. It says Labor and Diag Rates Calculator, right? See where it says Request Access below that? You'd click on that, and up pops the secret, top secret password. Vin Waterhouse Napa Auto Care. It's so simple and so stupid, anybody could break into it. But it's Vin Waterhouse Napa Auto Care. If you want to take a picture of that, it'll get you right to the web. Once you type in the password, and by the way, I'm here all day tomorrow. I'll be hovering around the Napa booth, and if K&M wants me to do anything, I'm happy to do that too. And I have benchmarks and stats I'll give to you guys. And if you come over with your phones, I'll show you how to use this, because you can do this on your phone and calculate exactly what your profit is per billed hour. Once I click on that, it wants me to fill out this form, this worksheet. What are my labor sales? Well, that comes from your computer. What are your parts sales? That came from your computer. Parts costs, that came from your computer. Posted labor, they came from your head. The difference between A and B, that's the difference between your highest and second highest paid technician. My example on there is my A tech makes 20 an hour, my B tech makes 15, there's a difference of 5. Okay? You would put that in there. Maybe a bigger difference than that. I haven't updated that little example. You want to use a rock bottom, if there were somebody who paid the same, you use a rock bottom minimum of $4. Why? Because when you have a higher direct cost doing diagnostics, we're going to get into that, you have a higher direct cost because you usually use your more skilled technicians doing diagnostic, which is a higher cost. We need to make 67% on that so we can cover the cost of equipment and access to information. Okay, so once we filled it in, okay, labor, in my example, labor was $306, parts was $294, parts cost $161.7, my labor rate's $100, and the difference between my highest and second highest paid was $5. That's going to print this little report out. It's going to say, Vin, your sales are $600,000, in labor is 51% of your business, and parts is 49. That's always good. It says your labor rate is $100 an hour, and you sell $96.08 an hour in parts, Vin. But your gross profit on those parts is 45%, so you make $43.24 an hour on gross profit per billed hour when you're working on a vehicle. So your labor-intensive rate is the 100 in the labor that we talked about and the 43.24. That's your combined gross profit per billed hour. So when you do a job, you're not going to take in 143.24, can sell a part at cost, use this rate. And it takes everything from below average just to average profit. Your diagnostic rate is going to be different. That's higher. It's 153.39 because I had a higher direct cost doing the repair. We had to factor that in, which I'll show you. By the way, I don't have a timer here. There was going to be. Can anybody tell me what time it is? 4:38. Okay, so I got it. Okay, thank you. I got 42 minutes. Thank you. So let's do a diagnostic labor rate. You now remember the Volvo story I told you about? Right? The husband and wife brought it to the shop. He put his best technician in the vehicle for 3 actual hours and fixed it, and all it was a clip under the dash. Number one, that technician was being paid $10 an hour more than anybody else in the shop. He was the resident guru. Number two, we didn't sell the parts. Number three, we're paying for information. Number four, having to update equipment. So we start off, if I'm going to be on that Volvo, I have to start with my 100 in labor rate, my regular labor rate. I have to also build $40 in parts profit in there, so that's $140. But the wage difference between my highest and second paid technician doing that work was $10 an hour, and I want 67% profit on that. So I took the $10, divided by 0.33, that's $30.30. Then I subtracted the $10 right back out again, because I had it built in my regular labor rate and standard labor rate, and I didn't want to cheat the customer. So that's $20.30 I have to add to that labor rate, of which 10 of it's going directly to my technician. And the other $10.30 goes to you, the owner, to cover those other costs. So my diagnostic rate is 100 in labor, the 40 in parts, the $20.30, or 160.30. I have 3 labor rates, standard at 100, labor intensive at 140, and diag at 160.30. And when I sell it, I'm never going to say 3 hours times 160.30. I'm never going to go 3 hours times 100 is 300. I'm going to menu price it and just talk about the benefits, how we're going to stand behind it. It's fixed, it's dependable, we'll take care of it, we back you up, just like you do when you sell your tires. Okay, let's say presenting the bill, it went something like this. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, we have some good news. The vehicle is dependable, it's fixed, you can take it shopping, you can trust it, you're going to come back in the same day in the same vehicle, it's good to go. It wasn't easy, but we fixed it. And here's what we did. We ran your vehicle through a series of sophisticated tests using state-of-the-art of equipment. We also have access to some of the finest minds in the United States of America on retainer, Identifix. It's really true, isn't it? And what we did is we conferred with them, if you did. We printed out a wiring diagram the way that vehicle came off the assembly line. We hooked up a scanner, we read codes, you inspected this, we tested this, and did this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, all the time I'm building in value. And we fix it, it's good to go, it's dependable, we're gonna stand behind that, and we thank you for your business. How much is the bill? $480.90. Not how long I worked on it, not at what labor rate, it's just a menu price like an oil change is a menu price. So let's say we have a customer who has an intermittent problem, and they say they can get a parts store to diagnose it free. So the customer comes in, they have this intermittent problem, and they're telling you about it, and you say, well, let me ask you, could you bring the vehicle in so we could look at it and demonstrate it for me so we could fix it for you? Well, I could bring it in, Vin, but I really can't demo it. Why? Is there any condition you can create that would make it happen? Hot, cold, wet, dry, going up and down a hill, pulling, anything like that? Rain, moisture, something? No, not at all. Okay, Mrs. Jones, I want to ask you a question, and I hope you won't think I've lost my marbles because it's not going to sound like it's related. Have you ever worked with a computer? Yes, I have. Did you have them freeze up? Yes. Did it give you a warning it was going to freeze up? No. So once it froze up, what did you do? You hit the space bar and moved the mouse a few times and nothing happened. Is that fair to say? Yes. And then did you ever get frustrated and shut it off and reboot it and it comes back and works? Voila. Yes. Well, did it give you a warning that it was going to work? Did you know it was going to work? No. Will it freeze up again sometime? Probably will. And will you get a warning? No, you won't. So the question I want to ask you, Mrs. Jones, is this. Is that how your vehicle is acting? If they say yes, I'm going to say thank you very much. Now I know exactly what you're going through. And we see that problem every day and more so as these vehicles become more and more electronic. They're basically batteries on wheels. And it can be something as simple and inexpensive as a chafed or a broken wire, or as complex as a computer and anything in between. So what I'm going to recommend is what we call a phase 1 system service. What is that, the customer says? It's a series of sophisticated tests using state-of-the-art of equipment. And we also, in addition, have access to some of the finest minds on retainer that we have available to us. How much is that, she says? Well, let's just make believe in your mind. If you had an hour, it'd be great, right? Based on your interview. So you'd say, well, that's $160.30. $160.30, the customer says. Well, can't you put it on a magic machine? I know YouTube has these test things, and it tells you, and I can go to some parts stores, and they diagnose it. They put it on this magic machine, and it diagnoses it, and it tells you just what parts you need. Can't you do that, the customer says, with big saucer eyes, trying to keep their price in line? I have to look at the customer in the eye and say, with all due respect, there is no magic machine. And diagnose, I'm not so sure I know what that means. But there is no magic machine. If there was, I'd own one. And let me give you an example, because I don't want to sound condescending. Mrs. Jones, your vehicle has a thing called a check engine light. And if that light comes on, there's clearly a malfunction. And that malfunction could be something as simple as a check as a loose gas cap. I tighten up your cap, your light goes out, you're a happy person. You come back next week, the light's on, but the gas cap's tight. Yes, because it's something else. Mrs. Jones, maybe 60 different reasons why that one light comes on. Now, I guarantee you, I could fix a check engine light, but I could do as many as up to 59 unnecessary repairs because I'd be guessing with your money and my reputation, and neither one of us can afford that. That's the only way we'd know without testing. So I recommend a phase one system service. So let's say she said, oh, okay. Oh, and by the way, the only way I would know without testing, if you get 60 reasons why your check engine light comes on, then what you need is 60 check engine lights on your dashboard. So when light 42 comes on, we know it's caused 42. But you get one light and 60 different reasons that makes it come on. I just try to break it down, simple, common sense. So they said, okay, go ahead and do that. So if they gave you the permission to go an hour, right, that's $160.30. That would allow you to spend up to 1 full hour in that vehicle using every and all resources you have. You're getting paid for the parts, you're getting paid for the labor, you're getting paid for the higher wages, you're getting paid for access to information. Let's take the worst case scenario. I get an hour goes through and I haven't fixed it. I have not fixed it. The only good news is I know a lot more than I did an hour ago. Okay? So I'd have to say something like Mrs. Jones says where we are. The majority of the time we do isolate it and fix it in phase one, and if we're lucky, sometimes it doesn't even require a part. In this case, we didn't figure it out. We haven't fixed it yet. We need to go to phase two, but let me tell you where we stand. You drive the vehicle every day, and based on what you've been experiencing, here's what we did. We inspected this, we tested this, we printed a wiring diagram, we consulted with the people that we have on retainer. We did this, and we did this, we did this, we did this. And based on what you're experiencing, it could have, should have been any one of these components. And if I had just listened to you without testing, I could have spent maybe $500 of your money by now by replacing some components that did not need to be replaced, but they're all good. I'm just saying I need to go to phase two. So they said, well, let's just say, they said, well, how much is phase two? Well, let's say in your mind, you've already got an hour into this. Give me another 7/10 of an hour, and I think I can figure out what it is. What would you charge? 0.7 times 160.30 is 112.21. Or what if you had a customer come in and said they're giving you a concern about a vehicle, and you say, gee whiz, I had a vehicle in here about 3 months ago that did the exact same thing. I think I know what it is. Give me a half an hour, I can figure that out. What would you charge? 0.5 times 160.30, and the bill would be $80.15. All we're selling here, based on the interview, is a block of time at the right rate. That's all it is, okay? So let's talk about the financial impact. As we said, your work is broken into 3 categories. Starters, standard, which would be parts and labor, the gravy work. Starters, brakes, drive belts, etc. Labor intensive, which would be rear main seal, intake, manifold gasket, that sort of thing. A fuse, installing an engine. Maybe diagnostic could be intermittent check engine light, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's break the work down. So let's say the average shop bills 346.5 hours a month, for whatever that's worth. We build 344 hours. And we looked at our work, we found that 30% of our time, we were doing standard mechanical work. So 344 hours times 30%, we spent 103.2 hours doing mechanical standard work. We spent 15% of our time, 344 hours times 15%, or 51.6 hours doing labor-intensive work, and we spent 55% of that time doing diag work, 189.2 hours. And if we total up all those hours that we worked, there's 344 hours. And if we charged our regular labor rate times $100, we'd have billed $34,400 in labor. Now let's see what happens when you attach the appropriate labor rate. Let's say we had 103.2 hours times $100, my standard labor rate. That would be $10,320. Let's say I had 51.6 hours times 140 an hour. That would be $72.24. Let's say I had 189.2 hours times 160.30. That would be $30,328. So using all 3 labor rates, we'd have billed $47,872. If we subtract what we'd have billed if we just used the standard labor rate, that would be $34,400. So what I'm saying to you is, by using all 3 labor rates, you would have enhanced your revenue that month by $13,472. Now, before you fall out of your chair and you say that's a bit lofty, then, some of the wealthiest people I do not know, but I get to watch them on television, professional baseball players. If you are a 300 hitter in professional baseball, you're a multi-millionaire every summer. And that's because your failure rate's only 70%. Think about that. They fail 70% of the time. 7 out of 10 times, you hope they'll get a hit, do something, right? They make an out. Well, I took that same stat and I said, 13,472, it's not shown on my screen, but times 12 would be 47,872, minus the 34,4 is 13,472, times 30%. If 7 out of 10 times that it called for a labor-intensive rate, where you're making below average gross profit, but you only used it 30% of the time, you would recover $4,041. Let him fly away here for a second. We're assuming the customer is sitting on the roof with a stopwatch. I would have charged $47,872 using all 3 labor rates, minus the $34,400, which I would have charged only using standard labor rate. That's $13,472 recovered in 1 month with total integrity. Times 12 months, it could be as much as $161,664. And if you had a 30% success rate, that would generate $48,499 annually. Okay? $48,499 divided by 12 is about $4,041 a month. Of that $161,664, if you used it half the time, and half the time you didn't use it because you didn't feel you could, you'd still pick up a little over $80,000. Now, on my website, you can download these forms. There's 5 ways to charge: standard, labor-intensive, diagnostic, menu, and combination. Okay? Let's talk about standard work, parts labor, where you make a lot of money. Brakes, drive belts, timing belts, water pumps, fuel pumps, exhaust, ball joints, radiators, CV axles, alternators. Labor-intensive work, engine replacement, intake manifold gasket, valve cover gaskets, rear main seal, that would be at $140 an hour. Diagnostic work, check engine light, intermittent start, AC service, that's at $160.30 an hour. Okay, menu, lube oil filter, not so much. That's morphing, that's changing, isn't it? But maybe transmission, flush alignments, and fuel injection cleaning would be menu. And then you have a combination. A combination could be like when we changed that bulb in that Chevy. I spent an hour taking the bumper off, right? I removed the wash reservoir, replaced the bulb, then I reversed the process and put the bumper back on. You could have an hour diagnosing a car and then a mechanical repair for the fix. So yes, you can have a combination. And the key is to look at all your work and predetermine what would happen. So no matter who waits on the customer, the customer gets charged exactly the same because you put the 3 labor rates in your computer. If you have an Napa track system or whatever you're using, just put the 3 labor rates in and you go from there. Your technician not only does not get hurt, they'll be rewarded for it. Okay? Let's take a look. A 5% increase in efficiency at $100 an hour. 3 minutes an hour at $100 an hour is $1,020 per month per technician. At labor intensive at $140 an hour, a 5% increase in efficiency is $1,428 a month per technician. So if anybody in this room is at $150 an hour, 3 minutes an hour, 1 more hour every 2.5 days comes to $1,530. On the other hand, if you lose 3 minutes an hour, it's going to cost you that kind of money. At diagnostic rate, $160.30, 5% is $1,665 per month per technician. So you can, I don't have time here to go over it. I'm going to be at the booth, but you can set up all kinds of incentives to take care of your people, for sure. So track and manage your labor. Use your labor-intensive rate for low-profit repairs. Sell your parts at cost, like dealership parts. Engines. If you're not making your full profit, sell the engine at cost. Use your labor-intensive rate. Use your diagnostic rate for electrical issues, menu price repairs, and so forth. And what I'm going to say is this. Who knows when electric cars are really going to be here, but they are going to be here. We can fight it all we want, but they will be here. And you'll be selling less and less parts, and your expenses will go nowhere but up. So it's not a matter of if you start to build that profit in the labor, it's when. And I'd say take advantage of it now. Before I close out, I just want to say, up there, I've been around since 1990. I did my first test market with Napa. I started my first company in 86 doing accounting. We have a 2-day financial management class. We have a 1-day service manager class. We have a 3-hour shop employee class to get everybody in the same wavelength on a need-to-know basis. We provide auto repair shop statistics through Napa. By the way, you can go to any of the classes I do through Napa, and it doesn't cost you a dime. Napa has a 440 scholarship. So you go to my class, they typically charge you $595 for the 2-day class, and then they give you $440 back in free product. You don't have to buy a dime from them, ever. It's just their way. So I do auto repair shop statistics. It's called the Auto Care Financial GPS. I'll have some of those at the bench. In 66 categories. What does the average shop do? What does the average of the top 25 do? For everything from labor sales, protective parts, private, labor rates. And the amazing thing is, the high profit firms who make 3.6 times the profit as the average shop, their labor rate is actually $1.35 less than the average shops. I'll repeat that. The high profit firms who make 3.6 times the net profit as average shops, their labor rate is $1.35 less than the average shops. They make it because they're efficient. They make it because they use different labor rates. They make it for a lot of different reasons. But they do, and I study them. And I never know how the results are going to be. So I think I have come to an end. I want to thank you very, very much for your kindness to be here with me. And it's really kind of a privilege for me to be here. My first time with K&M Tire. So God bless you, and thank you so very much. Thank you.